cast out from her people for dissonance, until a widowed salvager unearthed her from a crystalline tomb and brought her home. The unmerciful crystalline shadows of Kepler 7b's twin suns beat down on Kaiden Vel's weathered face as he piloted his battered transport ship, the Kronos, across the barren plateau. Sweat ran down his neck, soaking the collar of his already damp uniform. The ship's cooling system whined pitifully, adding to the endless list of broken parts. "Piece of junk," he muttered, giving the console a dismissive whack. "Just hold together a little longer." It had been 6 months since Serafina's death, and everything seemed to be falling apart. The ship, the house, his life. Only his daughters kept him going. 3 bright stars in the endless darkness. Kaiden didn't plan on witnessing an execution today. He was only scouting the deep plateaus for old artifacts to supplement his meager income. But when he reached the ridge, the scene below made his blood run cold. A group of Aurorians, tall, graceful humanoids with vibrant blue skin and elongated limbs, stood in a ritualistic circle. At the center of their circle, a female was systematically being consumed by slowly growing crystals. Even from this distance, her terror was palpable. Kaiden cut the engines and grabbed his binoculars. The Aurorians were known for their strict sonic casts and ruthless population control, but he had never seen their methods firsthand. The female's skin, shimmering like a polished sapphire, reflected the harsh sunlight. Unlike the others, whose bodies were adorned with intricate sonic patterns denoting their caste, hers were plain, almost invisible. Her eyes, large, almond-shaped, and full of despair, stared directly at his position, as if she could feel his presence. The Aurorians finished their work, leaving only her head exposed above the hardened crystals. One elder spoke words Kaiden couldn't hear before the group departed in their sleek transport ships, leaving her to the mercy of the elements and the nocturnal predators that would soon emerge to hunt. "Damn them," Kaiden whispered, lowering his binoculars. He knew the Aurorian customs. This female had been deemed a dissonant unable to resonate with the flows of their society, a crime punishable by death in their resource-limited world. By sundown, the flying predators would descend upon her. He should leave. This was not his business. The Aurorians would execute him without hesitation if they caught him interfering with their rituals. He had 3 young daughters back home who needed their last remaining parent. However, as the suns began to sink below the horizon, casting long shadows across the wasteland, Kaiden found himself plotting a rescue route instead of heading home. "I must be insane," he muttered, restarting the Kronos. He set a course for his home, his mind filled with half-formed plans. The small prefabricated structure that served as both a home and headquarters for his business came into view on the horizon. Kaiden landed with a jarring thud, the ship's suspension groaning in protest. Inside, 8-year-old Lyra was trying to braid the unruly blonde hair of 6-year-old Emma, while 4-year-old Sophie was coloring with gusto on some recycled paper. "Daddy!" They cheered in unison, abandoning their activities to run and hug him. "Hey, little rascals," he said, forcing himself to sound cheerful as he hugged them. "Listen to me. I have to go out for a little while." Lyra's face fell. "But you promised to help with the hydroponics tonight." "I know, Starlight, but this is important. It's an emergency, you could say." He knelt down. "I need the 3 of you to stay here. Lock the doors. Don't open for anyone but me." "Is it dangerous?" Emma asked, her blue eyes wide. Kaiden hesitated. "Maybe. That's why you're staying here." He quickly gathered supplies: water, a first aid kit, his old service pistol, and a thermal blanket. As he prepared to leave, he kissed each daughter on the forehead. "I'll be back before you know it. Be good." What Kaiden didn't notice was the silent exchange between his daughters as he headed back to his ship. And he didn't see them sneak aboard through a rarely used maintenance hatch while he was running his pre-flight checks. The suns were already nearly touching the horizon when Kaiden returned to the execution site. He landed at a safe distance and approached on foot, his pistol at the ready. The Aurorian female's eyes were wide as his shadow fell over her face. Dust coated her features, and her lips were cracked from dehydration. "Human," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Why do you risk your life for me?" Kaiden knelt down and began to dig with a small folding shovel. "Because nobody deserves a fate like this." Her eyes, a deep violet color that seemed to shift shades like the aurora borealis, widened in disbelief. "They will kill you if they discover this." "Then let's not be discovered," he said, working quickly, methodically freeing her body from the crystalline tomb. The crystals were tightly compacted, making each stroke of the shovel heavy. In the distance, an eerie wailing began, the desert predators awakening for their nightly hunt. Kaiden dug faster. When he finally freed her, she was too weak to stand. Her body was slender but strong, covered in subtle patterns that seemed to shimmer in the fading light. Kaiden wrapped her in his thermal blanket and lifted her into his arms. "I've got you," he said, surprised at how light she felt despite her height. "What's your name?" "Xandra," she replied, her head resting on his shoulder. I was Xandra." The wailing grew closer as Kaiden carried her back to the ship. As the door hissed open, he stumbled inside, sealing it behind him. "We made it," he breathed, carefully setting her down on a small medical cot in the cargo bay. "Daddy, who is she?" Kaiden spun around, his heart nearly stopping. There, from behind a storage container, 3 little blonde heads popped out. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, and immediately regretted his harsh tone as Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "We wanted to help," Lyra said defiantly. "You looked scared when you left." Xandra's gaze shifted between Kaiden and the children, a mixture of surprise and confusion on her face. "These are your offspring?" she asked weakly. "My daughters," Kaiden confirmed, running a hand through his hair in frustration, "who were supposed to be safely at home." Emma approached cautiously, studying the alien. "She's pretty. Why is she blue?" Before Kaiden could answer, the ship's proximity alarm blared. Lights appeared on the screen on the horizon. Aurorian ships, heading right for them. "Everybody buckle up," Kaiden commanded, jumping into the pilot's seat. "We're leaving now." As the engines roared to life, Xandra's eyes met his in the console's reflection. "You put your family in danger for me," she said, her voice stronger. "Why?" Kaiden gunned the thrusters, sending the ship lurching skyward. "That's a conversation for when we're not being hunted by executioners." The ship broke atmosphere, stars replacing the darkening sky. Only then did Kaiden allow himself a deep breath. He had just committed a major crime against the dominant species on their adoptive planet, with children and an illegal refugee on board. There would be consequences, and they would be severe. But looking back at the woman he had saved, whom his daughters were cautiously offering water to, Kaiden couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. Some things were worth the risk. The ship's life support systems hummed steadily as Kaiden plotted a course through the asteroid belt that girded the outer reaches of the Kepler 7b system. His calloused hands moved with practiced precision over the navigation console, each movement deliberate and focused. "Daddy, she's waking up again," Lyra called from the cargo bay. Kaiden put the ship on autopilot and went back. His daughters were arranged around Xandra like curious sentinels. Lyra, as usual, had taken charge, holding a water pouch to the Aurorian's lips. Sophie sat on the floor near the cot's feet, eyes wide and silent, while Emma held a damp cloth nearby. "Give her some space, girls," Kaiden said, gently shooing them back. The Aurorian's violet eyes slowly unfocused, then focused on his face. The vibrant blue of her skin had faded somewhat. It concerned him. "How are you feeling?" he asked, running a medical scanner over her body. "I am recuperating," she replied, her melodic voice stronger. "Your offspring have been very attentive." "Daughters," Kaiden corrected automatically. "On Earth, where humans come from, we call female children daughters." "Daughters," Xandra repeated, tasting the word. Her gaze moved to the girls. "You were kind to a stranger. It is not something many species practice." Lyra puffed out her chest. "Daddy says helping people in trouble is what makes us human." An interesting philosophy. Xandra attempted to sit up, and Kaiden helped her, adjusting the thermal blanket to preserve her modesty. "I have set a course for the Gleam Station," he explained. "It's a trading post on the edge of the system. We can resupply there." Maybe find you some proper clothes and figure out our next move. There will be no our next move, human, Xandra said firmly. You have already risked too much. At the Gleam, I will leave your company. And where will you go? Kaiden challenged. The Aurorians have outposts throughout this sector. The moment you are spotted, they will finish what they started. A shadow passed over Xandra's face. Perhaps that is my destiny. No, Sophie suddenly exclaimed, her little face fierce. You can't leave. You can stay with us forever. Kaiden sighed. Sophie, why did they bury you? Emma interrupted, her practical nature taking over. Is it because you're sick? Xandra's expression softened as she looked at the child. In a way, yes. Among my people, the ability to resonate with sound is sacred. Those who cannot are deemed flawed, unworthy of consuming resources. That's silly, Lyra stated with the absolute certainty of an 8-year-old girl. Mommy couldn't have any more babies after Sophie, but she wasn't flawed. A pang shot through Kaiden at the mention of Seraphina. Different cultures have different values. Lyra, he said softly. Barbaric values, Xandra muttered, and then looked embarrassed by her own words. Forgive me. I should not speak ill of my people's ways, even when those ways almost killed you. Kaiden raised an eyebrow. Before she could answer, the ship's alarm sounded again. Kaiden rushed to the cockpit, his heart sinking as he checked the scanners. Aurorian patrol ship, he announced grimly. They're hailing us. They must not find me here, Xandra said, struggling to stand. They will execute all of you for interfering with their justice. Kaiden's mind raced. The contraband compartment. It's under the floor panels in my quarters. He helped Xandra into the hidden space, designed for transporting goods of questionable legality, a feature the previous owner had installed and one Kaiden never thought he'd use. The compartment was cramped, but it could hide her from a casual inspection. Be absolutely silent, he instructed, closing the panel. Girls, not a word about our guest, understood? This is a matter of life and death. 3 solemn nods answered him. He returned to the cockpit and accepted the hail. The screen showed a stern-looking Aurorian, his intricate facial patterns indicating a high military rank. Human vessel, identify yourself and the purpose of your presence in this sector. Kaiden Vel, registration T-Checks 1138, he replied, keeping his voice calm. Independent prospector and salvager. I am transporting artifacts to the Gleam station. Your vessel was spotted near a sacred ritual site today. Explain your presence there, the Aurorian stated. Kaiden was ready for this. I was prospecting for artifacts. When I realized I had entered a ritual zone, I immediately left. I apologize for the intrusion. The Aurorian's eyes narrowed. We will be boarding your vessel for an inspection. With all due respect, Commander, I have 3 small children on board, and we are pressed for time, Kaiden countered. I am happy to submit to a remote scan. A tense silence followed. Kaiden felt sweat bead on his forehead. Very well. The Aurorian finally conceded. Prepare for a scan. Kaiden nodded, praying that the contraband compartment was as scan-proof as advertised. A beam of light swept over the ship, cataloging its contents. Scan complete, the Aurorian announced after a grueling minute. Be advised, human, that interfering with Aurorian justice is punishable by death. Proceed to your destination. The transmission ended, and Kaiden let out a heavy breath. We're clear, he called out. He brought Xandra out of the compartment, noticing how the confined space had depleted her already weakened state. She was trembling slightly as he helped her back onto the cot. You keep risking everything, she said softly. I do not understand. Kaiden checked her vitals with the scanner. Let's just say I've seen enough injustice in my life to know it when I see it. You were a warrior in your world? She asked, studying his methodical movements. Colonial Marine Corps, 15 years, he confirmed. Serve in the Centauri conflict and the regal border disputes before settling down. And yet you chose this isolated existence, far from your own kind. Kaiden's face darkened. Seraphina, my wife, was a bioresonant botanist. She believed that Kepler 7b held plant compounds that could revolutionize medicine. When she was granted permission for a long-term research settlement, we came here as a family. He paused. She died 6 months ago. A respiratory infection. The Aurorian doctors refused to treat her. Said their medicines were incompatible with human physiology. Understanding dawned in Xandra's eyes. So you hold a grudge against my people. I hold a grudge against systems that decide who gets to live and who gets to die based on arbitrary rules, Kaiden corrected. Your people, my people, it doesn't matter. Life should be valued. The ship's navigation system chimed, indicating they were approaching the Gleam station. Kaiden returned to the controls, bringing them into the docking queue. We need to get you disguised, he said to Xandra, as the girls helped her to stand. I have some old clothes that might fit, and a hooded cloak. Keep your head down and stay close. I cannot impose on you further, she protested. You're not imposing if I'm offering, Kaiden said firmly. One night on the Gleam, we resupply, we rest, and we figure out a plan. That's all I'm asking. She studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. One night, the Gleam station loomed before them, a sprawling structure of interconnected modules and docking arms. Unlike the elegant, organic architecture of Aurorian structures, the station was utilitarian, built by a consortium of humans and alien entrepreneurs looking to profit on the edge of explored space. As they docked, Kaiden gathered his daughters. Remember, not a word about Xandra's true identity. If anyone asks, she's a distant relative visiting from the Procyon colonies. Understood. A secret mission? Sophie whispered excitedly. Like in your bedtime stories. Despite the seriousness of their situation, Kaiden couldn't help but smile. Something like that, sweetheart. He helped Xandra into his spare clothes, which were too big for her slender frame, and the hooded cloak that concealed most of her distinguishing features. With the hood pulled low and her hands gloved, she could pass for any number of humanoid species at a distance. Stay close, he whispered as the airlock opened. The Gleam is neutral territory, but there are Aurorian merchants here. They stepped out into a bustling concourse, the girls' eyes wide at the diverse multitude of species moving through the station. Kaiden kept Xandra under a protective wing, guiding her through the crowd toward the residential sector. None of them noticed the lone figure watching from the shadows, following their movements with a calculating gaze. Eyes that recognized the characteristic gait of an Aurorian trying to pass unnoticed among strangers. Eyes that belonged to someone who knew exactly who Xandra was and what her discovery could mean. Kaiden rented a modest room at the far end of the Gleam Station's residential quarter, away from the main thoroughfares. The space was cramped for 5 occupants, a sleeping alcove, a small living area, and a tiny washroom, but it offered privacy, which was their primary concern. Girls, get washed up and ready for bed, Kaiden instructed, putting down their meager belongings. It's been a long day. As the children took turns in the washroom, Kaiden noticed Xandra standing awkwardly by the viewport, still wrapped in his oversized clothes, her blue skin catching the starlight in a way that made his breath catch for a moment. I'll take the floor, he offered, breaking the silence. You can have the bed with the girls. Xandra turned to face him, her violet eyes reflecting the station's outer lights. Your kindness continues to confuse me, Kaiden Vel. It's not kindness, it's just a basic sense of decency. He busied himself with setting up blankets on the floor, aware of her gaze following his movements. In my culture, such decency is reserved only for those who contribute to the perpetuation of our kind, she said softly. Dissonants are considered worse than dead. They are non-beings. Kaiden straightened up. Well, your culture has that one wrong. A gentle knock interrupted their conversation. Kaiden's hand instinctively went to his concealed pistol as he approached the door. Who is it? He called, giving Xandra a signal to hide from view. Someone who knows exactly who you are sheltering, human, a muffled male voice replied. And who wishes to help? Kaiden exchanged a look with Xandra, whose face had gone pale. He stood protectively between the door and his daughters before cracking it open. His weapon was at the ready. Standing outside was an Aurorian, shorter than most of his kind, dressed in the nondescript clothes of a merchant and a hood that partially hid his facial patterns. You have exactly 5 seconds to explain yourself before I close this door, Kaiden growled. The Aurorian's eyes flicked past him to where Xandra was standing. Lady Xandra, daughter of Prime Keeper Arian, I am ridden of the Spectre Council. So if the whispers are true? She asked, her posture suddenly regal despite her disheveled appearance. Your father believes you are dead, but there are those of us who know the truth of your condemnation. May I enter? What I have to say should not be spoken in the corridors. Kaiden reluctantly allowed him entry, keeping his weapon in plain sight. The girls watched wide-eyed from the sleeping alcove as the stranger came in. Talk fast, Kaiden demanded. Ridden nodded. Lady Xandra was condemned, not for dissonance. That was merely the official explanation. She was condemned because she discovered evidence that the Aurorian leadership has been manipulating our population's harmony for generations, creating artificial castes and controlling who can resonate. Is this true? Kaiden asked Xandra. She slowly nodded. I was a spectral geneticist in the reproductive sciences division. I found anomalies in the genetic scanning protocols, deliberate modifications being made to certain bloodlines to diminish harmony, while in others it was amplified. When she threatened to reveal this to the public, Ridden continued. The council, including her own father, sentenced her to the crystal burial. They could not publicly execute the daughter of the Prime Keeper, but they could make her disappear by a traditional means. Kaiden's mind raced. So you're not just an Aurorian. You're practically royalty. Lineage means little when you're being buried alive, Xandra said bitterly. But yes, my father is the supreme ruler of our people, and he let them bury you alive. Kaiden's voice rose in outrage. He ordered it, she whispered, to preserve a system that keeps him in power. Ridden interjected. There is more. An Aurorian delegation arrived on the Gleam an hour ago. Official representatives claiming to be searching for a dangerous fugitive. They are methodically searching the station. We need to go, Kaiden said immediately. My ship is docked in the lower bay, Ridden offered. I can get you to the outer colonies where the Spectre Council has a presence. Kaiden hesitated, studying the Aurorian. Why are you helping us? What's in it for you? I believe in the truth, Ridden said simply. And Lady Xandra's research can free our people from generations of genetic manipulation and social control. Before Kaiden could answer, Lyra called from the sleeping alcove, Daddy, Sophie isn't feeling well. He turned to find his youngest daughter flushed and shivering. When he put a hand to her forehead, her skin was burning with fever. She needs medical attention, he said, the concern in his voice evident. The station's medical facility will have records of your visit, Ridden warned. They will find you. Xandra knelt beside the child, examining her with gentle hands. This is like the Kepler fever that humans often get when they first visit Kepler 7b, but it is rarely serious unless left untreated. You know about human medicine? Kaiden asked in surprise. I studied comparative xenobiology as part of my research, she explained. I can cure her, but I will need specific medications. Ridden nodded. I can acquire them without raising suspicion. While he went on that errand, Kaiden sat beside Sophie, stroking her hair while Xandra prepared a cold compress. Their hands brushed by chance, sending an unexpected jolt between them. Their eyes met for a moment, and Kaiden was struck by the depth of concern in her eyes for a child she barely knew. Thank you, he said softly. Your daughter is innocent in all of this, Xandra replied, as are all children born into systems they did not create. In the cramped quarters, their proximity had suddenly become intimate. Kaiden was keenly aware of her. The subtle floral scent of her skin, the graceful movements of her hands, the curve of her neck as she bent over Sophie. When Seraphina died, he found himself saying, I thought I'd never feel. He trailed off, not knowing how to continue. Xandra's gaze softened. Attraction is not betrayal. Kaiden Vel. Life goes on even after loss. Her directness struck him. Apparently, Aurorians didn't believe in subtle flirting. Is that how Aurorians approach these things? Straight to the point? He asked with a slight smile. We are taught that biological reactions are natural and should not be clouded by unnecessary social constructs, she replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. Though perhaps that is why your human passion is so mesmerizing to so many of us. You create such elaborate rituals around what is, at its core, a biological imperative. There's more to it than biology, Kaiden countered. Yes, she agreed, her fingers lightly touching his hand. There is connection, understanding, a shared purpose. These things I have observed between us, even in our brief acquaintance. Their conversation was interrupted by Ridden's return with the medications. While Xandra administered them to Sophie, Kaiden found himself looking at her with a new awareness, marveling at the strange turns of fate that had brought this extraordinary woman into their lives. Later, when the children were asleep and Ridden stood watch, Kaiden and Xandra talked in whispers by the viewport, planning their escape, sneaking glances at each other in the starlight. Two beings from different worlds, brought together by circumstance, but held together by something neither of them had expected to find. Morning on the Gleam station came with the artificial illumination of the corridors and the distant hum of the life support systems. Kaiden woke up on his improvised bed on the floor to find Xandra already awake, hunched over a portable scanner she'd borrowed from Ridden, studying Sophie's blood sample with intense focus. "How is she?" Kaiden asked, his voice rough from sleep. Xandra looked up, her violet eyes alight with excitement rather than worry. "The fever has broken, but I found something remarkable in her genetic structure." Kaiden walked over to his daughter, brushing the blonde hair from her peaceful sleeping face. "What do you mean?" "There are markers, subtle modifications to her immune system that I have never seen in a human before." Xandra's fingers danced over the scanner's interface. "These modifications are similar to the theoretical adaptations I was researching before my condemnation." Kaiden frowned. "That's impossible. Sophie never had any genetic procedures. Was your wife still conducting research when she was pregnant with her?" The question hit Kaiden like a physical blow. Serafina was always experimenting with the native plant compounds. He paused, memories flooding back. During her pregnancy with Sophie, she developed a supplement derived from native flora. Said it would help the baby adapt. Xandra's expression grew animated. "Kaiden, your wife may have accidentally discovered what I was deliberately searching for, a way to counteract the genetic manipulation my people's leadership has been imposing for generations." Before they could discuss it further, a commotion erupted in the station corridor. Ridden burst through the door, his normally composed demeanor shattered. "They found us," he gasped. "Prime Keeper Arian himself has arrived with his personal guard. They've captured my contact in the docking bay and are conducting room-by-room searches." Kaiden immediately began gathering their belongings. "How much time do we have?" "Minutes at most. They're starting from the central hub and working outward." Xandra's face had gone pale at the mention of her father. "If Arian is here personally, he means to leave no witnesses. He cannot risk the truth about the genetic program becoming public." "We need a diversion," Kaiden decided, his military training kicking in. "Ridden, is your ship still accessible?" "Possibly through the maintenance tunnels, but..." A station-wide announcement interrupted him. "Attention all residents and visitors. This is Security Chief Morven. The Gleam station is now under lockdown by order of the Aurorian Diplomatic Corps. All civilians are to remain in their quarters for identity verification." Kaiden swore under his breath. "They're boxing us in." He turned to his daughters, now awake and watching with frightened eyes. "Girls, get dressed quickly. We're leaving." As they prepared to flee, Xandra pulled Kaiden aside. "I need to tell you something," she said urgently. "Last night, while examining Sophie, I discovered something else. Your wife's research. It didn't just create adaptation. It created a cure. The compounds in Sophie's bloodstream could potentially reverse generations of genetic manipulation among my people." Serafina never mentioned. She may not have known the full implications, but this discovery could free my people from the biological caste that had been artificially imposed on them. Xandra's eyes shone with emotion. "Your wife's work and your daughter's blood could save my entire species from genetic slavery." The weight of this revelation settled between them as they stared at each other. In the artificial light of the station morning, Kaiden saw Xandra not as an alien refugee, but as a woman fighting for her people's freedom a cause he understood all too well from his military days. "We'll figure this out together," he promised, his hand finding hers. The touch sent electricity through him, a reminder of the growing attraction that had been building between them since their first meeting. Xandra stepped closer, her blue skin flushed darker with emotion. "Last night when we spoke by the viewport, I have never met anyone like you, Kaiden Vel. Your kind calls it courage. This willingness to risk everything for what is right. My people would call it foolishness. Yet I find it." She searched for the word. Intoxicating. The air between them charged with unspoken desire. For a moment, the danger outside their door faded as Kaiden found himself drawn to her, his hand rising to trace the delicate patterns on her cheek. "Dad," Lyra's urgent whisper broke the moment. "Someone's coming." Ridden moved to the door, listening intently. "Guards, at least 4. We must go now." Kaiden reluctantly stepped back from Xandra, the promise of what might have been hanging between them. "We'll continue this conversation when we're safe," he murmured, his eyes conveying what words couldn't. Her answering smile was both acknowledgement and promise. They slipped in the maintenance corridor behind their quarters just as the main door burst open. Through a ventilation grate, Kaiden glimpsed tall Aurorian guards in ceremonial armor, led by an imposing figure whose elaborate facial markings and regal bearing could only belong to Prime Keeper Arian. "Find my daughter and the humans," the Keeper commanded, his voice cold with authority. "The children may be taken alive. Their genetic anomalies require study. The adult male is expendable." Kaiden felt Xandra stiffen beside him at her father's callous words. He squeezed her hand reassuringly as they crept through the narrow maintenance tunnels. The girls followed, silently behind, with Ridden bringing up the rear. They had nearly reached the lower docking bay when disaster struck. A maintenance worker rounded a corner, startled by their presence. Before Ridden could stop him, the worker hit an alarm panel. "Run!" Kaiden shouted, scooping up Sophie as they sprinted toward the bay doors. They burst into the cavernous docking area just as security shutters began descending. Ridden's small transport vessel sat on Pad 7, tantalizingly close yet separated from them by an open expanse. "We'll never make it before they seal the bay," Ridden said, despair evident in his voice. Kaiden surveyed the situation with the cool assessment of a veteran. "Yes, we will." He handed Sophie to Xandra. "Get to the ship. Start the engines. I'll create a distraction." "Kaiden, no," Xandra began, but he silenced her with a brief, fierce kiss that surprised them both with its intensity. "Trust me," he whispered against her lips. "I'll be right behind you." As Xandra led the children toward the ship with Ridden, Kaiden moved in the opposite direction toward the environmental control panel. Years of military service had taught him that every secure facility had vulnerabilities, and station docking bays were no exception. Behind him, he heard the bay doors slide open and the measured footsteps of Aurorian guards. He reached the panel just as a commanding voice rang out. "Halt, human!" Kaiden turned to see Prime Keeper Arian himself, flanked by 6 elite guards, their weapons trained on him. Beyond them, he could see Xandra and the others had reached Ridden's ship, the entry ramp descending. "You have something that belongs to me," Arian stated coldly. Kaiden smiled grimly. "No, Keeper, your daughter belongs to herself, and now she belongs with us." He slammed his fist into the emergency purge button. "He's gone," Lyra whispered, her small face pressed against the viewport as Ridden's ship broke the Gleam Station's orbit. "Dad's really gone." Xandra stood frozen at the navigation console, the emergency purge alarm still echoing in her mind. The image of Kaiden facing her father, sacrificing himself so they could escape, burned behind her eyes. "We have to go back," Emma insisted, tears streaming down her face. "We can't leave, Daddy." Ridden shook his head grimly. "The station is on complete lockdown. Returning now would mean capture for all of us." Xandra's hands trembled as she initiated the jump sequence. Every fiber of her being wanted to turn the ship around, but she knew Kaiden had made his choice. A choice to protect his daughters and the secret they carried in Sophie's blood. "We're not abandoning him," she finally said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We're regrouping." There's a Spectre Council outpost in the Cygnus sector where we'll be safe. From there, we can plan a rescue." As the stars stretched into lines around them, Xandra felt the weight of her new responsibility. 3 human children now looked to her, an alien they barely knew, for protection and guidance. And somewhere behind them, Kaiden Vel faced interrogation by the most powerful Aurorian in the galaxy, her father. The detention level of the Gleam Station was sterile and cold, designed to accommodate various species while offering the same universal discomfort. Kaiden sat on a hard bench in a force field cell, his wrists bound by energy restraints that bit into his skin whenever he moved too quickly. He'd been there for hours, refusing to answer questions about Xandra's whereabouts or Ridden's connections to the Spectre Council. The guards had eventually left him alone, presumably to soften him up through isolation. The cell door hissed open and Prime Keeper Arian entered. Without his ceremonial guards or elaborate regalia, he seemed smaller somehow, though no less dangerous. "Human," Arian said, his tone conversational as he took a seat opposite Kaiden. "I find myself curious about you." Kaiden remained silent, studying the Aurorian ruler. The family resemblance to Xandra was evident in the shape of his eyes and the elegant line of his jaw. Though where her features held warmth, his were carved from ice. "My daughter has always been impulsive," Arian continued, "passionate about her causes, but to risk everything for a mere theory, that was unexpected, even for her." "Genetic manipulation of your own people isn't a mere theory," Kaiden finally responded. "It's systematic oppression." Arian's expression remained impassive. "It is necessary control. Our world has limited resources. Without population management, we would have destroyed ourselves millennia ago. So instead, you created a caste system where some are born to rule and others to serve based on a resonance you control." Kaiden leaned forward, ignoring the bite of the restraints. "Where I come from, we call that tyranny. And where you come from, humans nearly rendered their planet uninhabitable through unchecked reproduction and resource consumption," Arian countered smoothly. "Your species survives through blind luck and desperate space colonization. We survive because we value every human life, not just the ones deemed worthy by some genetic lottery." Arian studied him with newfound interest. "Is that why you saved her?" "This abstract principle of universal worth." Kaiden thought of Xandra. Her courage, her brilliance, her unexpected tenderness with his daughters. "I saved her because no one deserves to die buried in a crystal for speaking the truth. And now you harbor feelings for her." It wasn't a question. How typically human to confuse biology with higher purpose. "You wouldn't understand." On the contrary, Arian stood, circling the small cell. "I understand perfectly. My daughter has always had a fascination with your species' emotional nature. Your impulsiveness, your willingness to risk everything for abstract concepts like love and freedom." He stopped directly behind Kaiden. "What you fail to understand is that she can never reciprocate these feelings as you imagine. Aurorian physiology doesn't allow for successful reproduction with humans. Her supposed dissonance was merely a convenient excuse." "This isn't about reproduction," Kaiden growled. "Isn't it?" Arian moved back into view. "Your mate died, leaving you with offspring. Biologically, you seek a replacement. My daughter represents an exotic alternative, but ultimately a futile one." Kaiden felt anger rising in his chest. "You really don't understand humans at all, do you? We're not slaves to biology like your engineered castes. And yet, here you are, captured because of biological impulses toward a female who isn't even your species." Arian's smile was cold. "Tell me where she's taken your children, and I'll ensure their return to human custody. Their unusual genetic markers make them valuable research subjects, but I have no desire to harm them." "Research subjects?" Kaiden strained against his restraints. "They're children, not lab specimens. They carry something unprecedented, a potential key to undoing generations of careful genetic architecture." Arian's voice hardened. "Your mate's experiments with our botanical compounds created something that should not exist. The children must be studied, their blood synthesized." Kaiden fell silent, realizing the full implications. Serafina's research hadn't been accidental. She'd been deliberately working to counteract the Aurorian genetic program. She must have discovered the truth during her studies and kept it secret, even from him, knowing the danger it posed. And now their youngest daughter carried the fruit of that research in her veins. "They're beyond your reach," Kaiden said finally. "And they'll stay that way." Arian sighed. "I had hoped for cooperation. Unfortunately, we must now resort to more invasive methods of interrogation." As guards entered with equipment Kaiden didn't recognize, he closed his eyes, focusing on the memory of Xandra's face, the promise in her eyes when they'd parted. Whatever happened now, he bought them time. Time for Xandra to protect his daughters and perhaps find a way to use Serafina's discovery. He only hoped he'd live long enough to see her again. In the cramped quarters of Ridden's ship, Xandra studied the genetic analysis of Sophie's blood sample for the 12th time. The children had finally fallen asleep in the small cabin, exhausted by grief and fear. "The compound is remarkable," she told Ridden softly. Kaiden Vel isolated a native plant enzyme that can rewrite the artificial genetic markers my father's scientists have been using for generations. With this, we could restore natural resonance patterns across our entire population. A cure for genetic slavery, Ridden marveled. But without the original research, we have something better. Xandra indicated the sleeping child. We have a living synthesis. Sophie's body continues to produce the compound naturally. With careful extraction and analysis, we can reverse engineer the formula and use it as leverage to free Kaiden, Ridden concluded. Xandra's gaze drifted to the stars outside. "Not leverage, revolution." Her voice hardened with determination. "My father thinks he's captured a simple human who can be broken through interrogation. He doesn't understand what Kaiden Vel represents." "And what is that?" Ridden asked. "Hope," Xandra whispered. "Courage. The human capacity to fight for others, even at great personal cost." She touched the console where she'd stored the genetic analysis. "Kaiden gave himself up so we could escape with this discovery. I won't let that sacrifice be in vain." As Ridden left to check their course, Xandra found herself alone with her thoughts. She recalled the brief, fierce kiss Kaiden had given her before staying behind, the first such contact she'd ever experienced. Aurorians did not typically express emotion through physical connection the way humans did. Yet in that moment, she felt something awaken within her, a response that transcended mere biology or cultural differences. Something uniquely human had touched her, changed her. She made a silent vow as the ship carried them towards safety. She would save Kaiden Vel, not just because he had saved her from the crystal burial, but because in a short time they'd known each other, he had shown her what it meant to be truly free. Free to choose, free to feel, free to love. And for that gift, she would risk everything. The interrogation chamber's sterile walls seemed to close in as Kaiden fought against the effects of the Aurorian truth serum. His military training had prepared him for resistance techniques, but the alien compound worked differently than human variants, attacking his nervous system in waves of increasing intensity. "The formula is quite effective on humans," Arian observed clinically. "Most subjects break within minutes." Kaiden focused on his breathing, using pain management techniques from his Marine days. "I'm not most subjects." A flicker of what might have been respect crossed the keeper's face. "Indeed, your species' tenacity continues to surprise me." Before Arian could continue, alarms blared throughout the station. The interrogation technician received an urgent communication, his expression shifting to concern. "Prime Keeper, there are reports of simultaneous uprisings across 3 Aurorian colonies. The Spectre Council has launched coordinated attacks on genetic control facilities." Arian's composure cracked. "Impossible. The movement lacks the resources for such coordination. They're broadcasting a message system-wide," the technician continued, "something about genetic liberation. They claim to have a cure for the population control measures." Kaiden couldn't suppress a smile, despite his pain. Xandra had wasted no time. Arian noticed his expression and leaned close. "What do you know of this?" Only that you underestimated both your daughter and humanity, Kaiden replied through gritted teeth. The station rocked suddenly, emergency lights flashing as artificial gravity fluctuated. Arian was summoned urgently to the command center, leaving Kaiden under guard. The moment the Keeper departed, Kaiden made his move. The restraints designed for Aurorian physiology had a weakness when stressed at a particular angle, a flaw he'd been quietly exploiting during the interrogation. With a final twist and a burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, the energy cuffs shorted out. The guard never saw the attack coming. Kaiden moved with the efficiency of his military training, rendering the Aurorian unconscious with a precise strike to a nerve cluster Xandra had once mentioned in passing. Armed with the guard's weapon, Kaiden navigated the chaos-filled corridors of the Gleam Station. The uprising had clearly spread here. He passed groups of Aurorian civilians confronting security forces, demanding the truth about the genetic manipulation program. He needed to reach a communication array to contact Xandra. The nearest one would be in the station's control hub, heavily guarded, but now potentially understaffed due to the spreading unrest. As he approached the hub, a familiar voice called from a side corridor. "Kaiden Vel, your timing is impeccable as always." He spun, weapon raised, then lowered it in shock. "Rittenhouse." The Aurorian rebel gestured for him to follow. "Xandra's plan is working perfectly. The Spectre Council cells received her formula synthesized from your daughter's blood. They've begun distributing it across Aurorian territories." "Where is she? Where are my daughters?" Kaiden demanded as they ducked into a maintenance shaft. "Safe for the moment, but we must hurry. Xandra has returned to confront her father publicly and expose the truth about the genetic program." Kaiden's heart raced at the thought of Xandra facing Arian alone. "Take me to her now." The Grand Assembly Hall of the Gleam Station had been commandeered by Spectre Council forces. Hundreds of Aurorians from the station and recently docked ships packed the space, their attention fixed on the central platform where Xandra stood, regal and resolute. Beside her stood Lyra, Emma, and Sophie, the three human children looking both frightened and determined as Xandra addressed the crowd through the station's broadcast system, her words reaching not just those present, but Aurorians across the sector. "For generations, we have been told that our rigid social structure was necessary for survival," her voice rang out. "That some must be blessed with resonance, while others, deemed less worthy, must remain dissonant. This was never natural selection, but calculated manipulation by those in power." She gestured to a display showing genetic sequences. "These are the markers artificially introduced into our population. And this," she indicated Sophie, who bravely stepped forward, "is the living proof that these manipulations can be reversed." The doors at the far end of the hall burst open. Prime Keeper Arian entered, flanked by his personal guard, his face a mask of cold fury. "This is treason," he announced, his authoritative voice cutting through the murmurs. "My daughter speaks from delusion, not science." "Then explain these," Xandra challenged, projecting new images onto the screens. "Your private research files, Father, detailing 3 centuries of systematic genetic modification to create castes based not on merit, but on bloodlines you deemed worthy." Arian's eyes narrowed. "You would destroy the stability of our entire civilization for an abstract concept of equality." "I would give our people the freedom to determine their own destiny," Xandra countered, "as humans have always done." "Humans," Arian scoffed. "A chaotic, emotional species who saved your daughter when you condemned her to death," Kaiden interrupted, stepping into view beside Rittenhouse. "Who valued her life when you discarded it." A ripple of reaction passed through the crowd as Kaiden made his way to the platform. The children spotted him and broke protocol, running to embrace their father with cries of joy. Xandra's composure momentarily cracked at the sight of him, alive, somewhat battered, but standing tall. Their eyes met across the platform, volumes of unspoken emotion passing between them. "This human," Arian addressed the crowd, regaining control, "has no understanding of our ways, our necessities. Would you follow the naive idealism of aliens and rebels over centuries of proven stability. An older Aurorian female stepped forward from the crowd. I would follow Truth Keeper. For 60 cycles, I believed I was naturally dissonant, unworthy of offspring. Now I learn it was by your design. Others joined her, voices rising in question and anger. The tide was turning. Arian sensed it, too. With a subtle gesture to his guards, he prepared to retreat. This isn't over, he warned Xandra. You risk civil war. No, father, she replied calmly. I offer liberation. The formula is already spreading across our worlds. Your control is ending, not with violence, but with truth. As if to punctuate her words, reports began flooding in from across Aurorian space. Peaceful demonstrations, genetic control facilities being opened to public scrutiny, centuries of secrets exposed to light. Arian looked at his daughter with new eyes. Not anger now, but something approaching, reluctant respect. You have your mother's conviction, he said quietly. She too believed some principles were worth any sacrifice. With that enigmatic statement, he departed, his authority visibly diminished as even his guards hesitated to follow. In the aftermath, as the assembly hall buzzed with excitement and plans for a new Aurorian future, Kaiden finally reached Xandra's side. You came back, he said simply. I never left, she replied, her fingers tentatively finding his. Not in any way that matters. That night, after the children were safely asleep in quarters provided by the new provisional authority on the Gleam station, Kaiden and Xandra found themselves alone for the first time since their separation. Your wife's research, Xandra said softly as they stood by a viewport watching ships arrive from across the sector, bringing more Aurorians seeking the liberation formula. She must have been extraordinary. Kaiden agreed. She believed in helping others no matter the cost. I think you would have liked each other. I owe her everything, Xandra murmured. My freedom, my people's future. Kaiden turned to face her fully. What happens now? Your people will need leadership during this transition. They have Ridden and others who have fought for this day far longer than I, she replied. My path lies elsewhere if you'll have me. The question hung between them, laden with possibility. The girls have already decided you're staying, Kaiden said with a smile. Sophie is planning to redecorate the spare room for you. Xandra stepped closer, her blue skin luminous in the starlight. And what about their father? What does he want? Kaiden's hand rose to trace the delicate patterns on her cheek, completing the gesture that had been interrupted days earlier. He wants what he's wanted since he first saw you in that crystalline wasteland, to bring you home. Their lips met in a kiss that bridged worlds. Human and Aurorian, passion and tenderness, past and future. When they finally parted, Xandra's eyes shimmered with emotion. I never understood human intimacy before, she confessed. My people connect for reproduction, for biological necessity, but this is something else entirely. Kaiden finished for her. That's what makes us human. That night, they discovered the language of touch that transcended species, a communion of bodies and souls that needed no translation. In the privacy of their quarters, cultural differences melted away, replaced by a more ancient understanding that predated both their civilizations. 3 months later, the homestead on Kepler 7b had been transformed. The hydroponics bay now included a research laboratory where Xandra continued to refine the formula that had liberated her people. Aurorian society was rebuilding itself, painfully at times, but with a new foundation of truth and choice rather than control. Arian had stepped down as prime keeper, replaced by a council that included representatives from all former castes. He had retreated to a remote estate, neither forgiven nor forgotten, but no longer in power. As the suns set over the crystalline plateau, Kaiden found Xandra in the garden, teaching the girls about native plant properties, continuing Seraphina's work with a reverence that honored her predecessor's vision. They're quick learners, Xandra remarked as the children ran off to prepare dinner. Especially Sophie, she has a natural affinity for xenobotany. Like her mother, Kaiden said, wrapping his arms around Xandra from behind. And her new mother. Xandra leaned into his embrace, still marveling at how natural such contact had become. I never imagined this future when you dug me from that crystal. A family, a purpose, love. That's humanity's gift, Kaiden murmured against her hair. We imagine impossible futures, then make them real. As night fell and the first stars appeared, they stood together. No longer rescuer and rescued, human and alien, but partners in a shared life neither could have predicted. From burial to belonging, from condemnation to connection, their unlikely journey had transformed not just their lives, but an entire civilization, proving once again that compassion could overcome cruelty and that sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply to dig someone free and bring them home.